In this problem, we will be solving a quadratic equation by completing the square. Our first key is to simplify on the left-hand side. So we're going to distribute 3p to our expression p minus 2. Our next step is to set our equation equal to 0. So our opposite of adding 4, we're going to subtract 4 on both sides. Our opposite of subtracting 2, we're going to add 2 on both sides. And from this step, there are actually quite a few ways you can proceed. You can always use the quadratic formula, which is x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And a is your coefficient of the squared term. So here we're using a variable p. So technically, it will be p is equal to this. So our a value is the coefficient of p squared. So a would be 3. B is our coefficient of p, which will be negative 4. And c would be our constant, which is negative 4. So quadratic formula you can always use for any type of quadratics. In this particular problem, we do want to proceed with completing the square. And there are quite a few ways to approach that. The technique that I like to use, here our leading coefficient is not 1. So to make our lives a little easier, what we would do is divide the entire equation by 3. And this way it just makes the problem a little easier in our approach. So we have p squared minus 4/3 p minus 4/3 equals 0. So our key step with completing the square, we do 1/2 times the coefficient of our linear term, the b term. We take that expression or that value and we square it, and then we add our result to both sides of our equation. So in this problem, our a value is 1. Our a is the coefficient of p squared. Our b value is a negative 4/3. And then we're going to square this value. So multiplying fractions, we multiply numerators together, we multiply denominators together. And then we can simplify this. So we can divide both terms by 2. So we have negative 2/3. And we square this to give us a positive 4/9. We have to square the numerator and square the denominator. So there's one step that I should have done prior to that, but we can do it now. We like for our constant to be on the other side. So our opposite of subtracting 4/3, we add 4/3. And now what we can do is that key step we already did. Half of our linear coefficient, negative 4/3, we square that value. We add our result to both sides of our equation. And on the right-hand side, now we can add these two fractions together. To add fractions together, we have to have the same denominator. So in order to make that happen, I want a denominator of 3. So for 4/3, I need to multiply the numerator by 3. So 4 times 3 would give me 12. Multiply my denominator by 3. 3 times 3 gives us 9. So this gives us 16/9. On the left-hand side, now what we can do is to factor. The whole purpose of completing the square is to change this problem into something that we can factor. And our shortcut is whatever we take half of the linear term to be, that's what's going to go inside of our parentheses. And now we can solve this problem by square root. So our opposite of squaring here is a square root. The square root cancels out that exponent of 2. And whenever we take the square root, we have to include our plus or minus sign. And we take the square root of the numerator, that will give us 4. Square root of the denominator, that will give us 3. And in order to solve for p, opposite of subtracting 2/3, we add 2/3 on both sides. Now, in order to get our final answer, we have to approach the plus or minus sign 2 ways. So we do 2/3 plus 4/3. That will give us 6/3, which is just 2. And 2/3 minus 4/3 would give us a negative 2/3. So those are our two solutions by completing the square.